you mentioned the Browns next year possibly going after a trade. Well, we had a running back trade today, and this one was kind of a surprise. I don't really know what they're doing here, but the Minnesota Vikings traded with the LA Rams for they switched 2026 picks for Cam Akers. So I don't know why the Vikings felt like they needed Cam Akers, unless Alexander Madison isn't impressive. I have not seen anything from Ty Chandler to make me think that Ty Chandler can't be the RB1 right now, because we haven't seen anything from Ty Chandler. I still think and maintain, from what I saw in preseason and from what I've seen in the few snaps he's gotten in the regular season, that they should give Ty Chandler a chance. I don't think you come out here and don't give Ty Chandler a chance and just cut him. I think he'll be picked up. And we tried to interview Ty Chandler, and I got a very nice email back from the Minnesota Vikings, director of communications, and they said he is too busy because it is it's the regular season, which is completely understandable. I'm just thankful the Vikings actually emailed me back. But we did reach out, try to get an interview. Hopefully we can get him on the show one day, because I am a big fan of his playing style. Cam Akers is always injured too. So like, he's been in the league since 2020, and I feel like he hasn't really done anything like of note other than win a Super Bowl because he just happened to be on the roster.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Cam Akers is, like you said, I don't really know what Minnesota's doing. I mean, I will say Madison hasn't really impressed. A lot of reports have been saying, he's not really getting those yards in those plays like Dalvin Cook was when he was in Minnesota. You kind of expected more from Madison being that running back one, since whenever Dalvin Cook would go out with injuries, like in years past, Madison would step up and be like a solid running back. So it's kind of shocking to see him not produce on the same level that, he was even producing. Because I remember years like last year and stuff like that, where Dalvin Cook would go out with an injury, or in years past, Dalvin Cook would go out with an injury. And then as soon as you heard about that, Madison would be like projected 16.7 points and would always get like 18 points or like 15. He was always a solid running back to throw in for a week, whenever Dalvin Cook was hurt. Now all of a sudden it just feels like, he had like 13 fantasy points week 1 and then like 4.9 fantasy points week 2. Now, I know a lot of people don't like when I bring up the fantasy points, but the reason that I bring up the fantasy points, the reason that we talk about fantasy points is the reason we talk about it is because it does project a lot on their playing value. Because yes, they might be playing good, but if they're not doing well in fantasy, obviously they're not getting those targets, they're not getting those catches, and especially for running backs, if they have low points, they're probably not doing something right. So, in my opinion, Madison hasn't really shown too much promise in fantasy. He hasn't been showing too much on the field, especially with that fumble. There's a lot going on there. Ty Chandler had, I think, 2 points in fantasy, which is only 2 points less than Madison did, and he's running back 1. So, and with Cam Akers being hurt all the time, I do agree. I mean, in LA at one point, I know I drafted him in fantasy the 1 year, literally didn't do anything. I don't trust Cam Akers. I don't really know what they're doing in Minnesota. I was going to say LA. LA's got it all figured out right now. I'm going to be posting a video about that very shortly here. I think LA's got it all figured out right now. It's just going to take a little bit of time. But I think with Minnesota, I don't really know what they're doing. Maybe they're going to try to use Madison and Akers as like a double running back duo, but I don't know why you wouldn't have just done that with Chandler, because, Chandler is, looks, I know, a lot more promising, and I don't really expect Ty Chandler to get hurt like Cam Akers is, very injury prone. Akers reminds me a lot of like a J.K. Dobbins, only, Cam Akers will go out for like 6 or 8 weeks and then come back, where J.K. Dobbins tends to be out for giant portions of seasons, usually season-ending injuries, which rest up J.K. Dobbins. I hope to see you next year, but also if your body can't handle it, please do not force it, because we don't want to see that. Same thing with Chubb. But nonetheless, don't really know what's going on in Minnesota there. Well, I guess we'll have to see come this week. Is Cam Akers hurt? Like, because I know he was out for a while. Is he hurt right now?
I
Or are they just
wouldn't
like
be.
not playing him like in
I
LA?
don't want to sound like a hater, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he is hurt.
I mean, because I know in the first couple, like in the first week or two, it was like Cam Akers was out, and I was like, this is kind of strange. I mean, it's really early on. I didn't really look too much into it because I don't really research too much on Akers, just because I mean, he's not really. I don't want to say relevant, like not relevant in a bad way, but I don't really think he's like entirely relevant right now. I mean, there is a chance he could blow up in Minnesota, but right now he's not really that relevant in fantasy or anything like that. So
Rams Rams trade disgruntled Cam Akers to Vikings.
okay, so he wasn't
I'm not
playing because he was mad, probably.
I'm not sure that Akers has a right to be disgruntled if I'm being honest, but
I don't know. I
uh,
mean, I like I said, I think they've can't, I think that Cam Akers train has sailed in L.A. and I think they're gonna move him over to Minnesota. Maybe they'll give him a chance.
I'd
I
like to
mean,
see which maybe it just didn't work in LA. Maybe Cam Akers pops off in Minnesota.
I,
Who
I mean,
knows?
we've seen that a lot, though. We have seen that a
Yeah,
lot. I mean,
change of location.
we've seen players, go from one team to another, and they end up being a better player. I mean, even like, or just like the same player just on a different team. I mean,
Mhm.
Tyreek Hill was in Kansas City for like multiple years, was a stud there, and now he's doing great things over in Miami. But I mean, maybe for Cam Akers, just a little change of scenery might be the difference maker for him. So, but I
Yeah.
mean, I hope for him. I hope that he's not always hurt. I do hope that he does well, but I am kind of upset because he's going to take that opportunity away from Ty Chandler. But nonetheless, we'll see what happens.